Let us now take the first look at my cello exercises, the book that accompanies your tapes and will serve as a text for most of our upcoming sessions. Chapter A on page 1 is designed to develop the strength and the suppleness in all the joints of the bow grip that I suggested to you in part 2. The first exercise at small letter A is always useful to get the feel of the stick, especially on cold mornings when one tries, as the first order of business, to establish a responsive fusion of the right hand and the bow. It looks like this. The bow is placed at the frog on the middle strings with the full hair, using the dead weight of the arm with the shoulder and the upper arm relaxed. We pull, not push, the bow stick as close to the hair as the flexibility of the stick permits. As always, the index finger is the chief transmitter of power, assisted by the second and third fingers hanging onto the stick by their first joints. The fourth finger and the thumb participate in the ownership of the bow but act with minimum pressure. Now alternate between a completely straightened index finger and one flattened at the knuckles, the other fingers following this movement inertly. All the work is done by the fingers. Don't initiate this motion with the arm. It is the fingers, not the arm, that we seek to strengthen here, and the elbow remains low. The pressure on the stick is constant throughout. The wrist remains flat, all the fingers stay in place, and we always use the full bow hair. Notice that this exercise does not demand much counter pressure from the thumb. This will be of interest to us anytime when a freely moving bow wants to go deeply into the string at the frog, as in resonant broken chords. All the strength flows directly from the muscles in the back into the string, while the intensity of the bow grip just suffices to hold the bow suspended. An example of this effortless application of arm weight could be the opening of the Elgar concerto. Exercises B and C use the same starting position as A. Again, the bow pressure and the amount of hair used are constant. We first bring the bow down to the C string by stretching the fingers, pulling with the little finger and rotating the bow around the thumb, which will assume a flatter position on the stick. Then we reverse the procedure by pulling in with the index finger toward a more oblique position of the thumb, which will bring the bow up to the A string. Keeping the hair flat on all four strings will teach us to avoid the habit of putting the bow on its inside edge whenever we cross from the low strings to the high ones. We must avoid this motion. The arm is not primarily involved in this motion. Using mostly the fingers becomes an advantage when the string changes occur so rapidly that it would be hazardous to a precise bow attack to play each stroke at its own normal arm level. An example might be the rondo from the string quintet in C major by Boccherini, where the fingers execute the 16th notes and the arm the 8th notes. In Chapter 1 of the Calisthenics on page 63, I have added another version of the foregoing exercise. I have already mentioned the foil, whose handling is in some respects similar to the bows. Well, here we can be real fencers. We enlarge the rotating movement around the thumb to a full 180 degrees. The hair is always down and parallel to the floor. Go all the way from the fencer's en garde position to a suicidal one, pointing the bow at your chest. You can walk all over town or campus learning to acquire a mobile and yet solid ownership of the bow in this way and let innocent bystanders wonder what on earth you are doing. Now on to Chapter B. Pages 3 through 9 look deceptively innocent with their exclusive use of open strings. Students may be tempted to skip quickly to those left-hand exercises that they mistakenly assume to be the only ones they will need to acquire a fine technique. And yet, all experienced string players know that it is the command of the bow that controls the soul and breath of their playing. So let us be patient in exploring basic bow functions. Often a few minutes at the beginning of the day spent on mastering anew certain bowing principles will save us much practice time later on when we are preoccupied with left-hand problems. The exercises on page 64 of the calisthenics suggest a concise way of starting the daily process of giving the bow arm freedom and deftness. Chapter B begins with juxtaposing sustained and short separated notes. Before I connect them on the following pages, I want to establish on page 3 precisely how arm, hand, and fingers produce the desired single bell sounds. Since the testing of pitch through double stops will occur early in left-hand exercises, I also include here open strings in double stops. They will need special care in the preparation of the level and angle of the bow so both strings respond together. But the touch of the bow in double stops differs in no way from corresponding strokes on single strings. All bow strokes have 3 common requirements. First, presence. Before we play, we have to set up the bow properly so that it can aim directly at the desired contact point without meandering or flailing motions. Second, contact. We must let the bow touch the string with the authority of good timing and the right amount of incisiveness. Contact can be established coming out of the air and landing with a pronated hand like an airplane touching down on its rear wheels, or using a more or less firm preparatory bow pressure. Third, freedom. We must stroke the string, not choke it, so it can vibrate freely. We may later on occasion stab or slap the string, but even in the shortest notes, the bow has to go across the string to set it in motion. Presence, contact, freedom. These 3 together will prevent missing or impure beginning of notes. Let us concentrate for 10 minutes every day while we work on our repertoire, on giving life to every note, and we shall see how such care will facilitate the creation of good phrases from healthy components. There can be no eloquence without good diction. To help the concept of well-focused sounds, I would like to start our bowing exercises on page 3 with the example of a ringing pizzicato. Every one of these isolated notes ought to have the pizzicato's clarity at its beginning, initiating a round body of sound followed by a natural diminuendo. Before we make use of the bow's ability to sustain single notes evenly or accent or swell on them, let this be the basic sound. Looking over to page 2, you can see that I list 5 bowing factors determining the character of single notes: bow speed, bow pressure, the intensity of the bow grip, the bow's distance from the bridge, and the amount of bow hair used. We must be very alert in adjusting these 5 factors instantly to each other until their interplay becomes wholly automatic. By indicating on page 3 the tempo and the length of the bow to be used on each note, number 1, the bow speed is already determined. Number 2, the bow pressure should be governed by Leopold Mozart's advice to students in his famous violin method, still valid after 200 years, not to be afraid to use right from the beginning, as he puts it, a serious, vigorous, and strong sound, even if this causes some initial impurity. Do not croon, but learn to sing out with increasing refinement. Later, a beautiful piano can be developed from a substantial forte. It does no good to hope that a threadbare sound will eventually balloon into a full one. But to avoid unnecessary roughness, do not use the extreme taut ends of the bow hair. At least 1 inch, both at the frog and at the tip, ought to be permanently off limits. Playing forte at the frog should always mean starting in the middle of the silver winding. If we aim carefully at this spot, we can start the Brahms double concerto vigorously without fear of cracking the sound as we match the big orchestral triplet D, E, F with the cello's augmentation and inversion of the same notes. The orchestra we can use page 3 advantageously to investigate the many variations in intensity of the bow grip, the contributing factor number 3. They range all the way from the relaxed hold when playing this note to the firmness of this one. Generally speaking, we can say that a fast bow speed requires less support from the thumb than a slow one, high strings less than low ones, bow strokes at the frog less than those at the tip, playing near the fingerboard less than being close to the bridge, smooth sounds less than explosive ones. In daily life, we frequently encounter the sensation of anticipating an action with a commensurate prior effort. Muscles are flexed more strongly before jumping than before taking a step, before lifting a box of books than one filled with feathers, before hitting a baseball for a mile than before bunting. Economy and aptness of means require that our preparation for bow action should include a constantly adaptable intensity under the stick. As to number 4, the bow's distance from the bridge, you will see that sustained notes sound richer, closer to the bridge, short ones away from it. And finally, I suggest the use of the full hair for page 3, particularly at the tip. To determine as clearly as possible what kind of sound we expect on each note, I find it very useful to identify their beginnings with certain consonants. On the sustained notes, look for sustainable consonants. An M will do nicely in section A. The sharp notes at B should come out as real T sounds. Since all the notes on page 3 are marked as starting from the string, we should also have to determine what consonants are appropriate for the preparatory setting of the bow. Try a B intensity before you go down into the M, and a D before the T. A whole book could and should be written on these linguistic relations to bow sounds. I can only hint at them here, but please think about it. Don't let the concept frighten you into thinking, I cannot stop at every note to figure all this out. It is just about as easy to learn as shaping one's lips and placing one's tongue in order to speak, meaning that after a while this complicated process becomes quite automatic. Many hollow vowel sounds, of which our bows are guilty, can be firmed by the proper use of the consonant concept. And it is such a quick and clear way to say to yourself or to a student, what is needed here is a series of B sounds. Not of P's. Of T's. Not of K's. In section 2 of chapter B, we now connect what we have learned to do singly in section 1. This must entail no loss of quality at the beginning of notes. We lead toward them with the roundest possible motions, concentrating on when and where and with what impact the new sound begins. Think of the paintbrush analogy of the last session. The paint will only flow onto the canvas from the end of the bristles, just as the sound will only be created at the contact point of bow and string. The arm leads the brush or the bow, making sweeping or minute motions only as the means toward an end. This motion of leading is always subject to an axiom that should be very obvious to us and yet is violated all too often, the truism that I put in italics at the bottom of page 2, namely, there must be a harmonious balance between the size or character of any bow motion and the sound effect desired. Sharp sounds require sharp motions, smooth sounds, gentle ones. Don't use haymakers for tiny sounds or skimp on large ones. When we have to connect strokes while skipping over intermediate strings, the arm motion remains round, but we have to add an abrupt slap with the hand. The same whipping motion will help to make a recalcitrant C string speak. Combining smooth arm motions with sharp wrist snaps serves as well, for instance, in the prelude of the fourth Bach suite. While there is a built-in roundness of motion when bow changes coincide with string changes, smooth bow changes on one string have presented a major problem through the ages. Again, I would say, remember what produced the clear beginnings of the single notes on page 3, and don't overcomplicate the motions taking you there. The preparation for the change into the up bow consists for me of leading the bow a little bit outside of a straight line and looping it back with the arm toward a right angle at the beginning of the up bow. Frequently, I combine this angling out with a roll out of the bow by means of going from a bow tilted inside to the full hair on the upstroke. And with a lifting of the elbow toward the position that I had defined as optimal for the beginning of up bows when I was practicing single notes in section 1. The first two measures on page 5 go briefly to the next higher string to suggest this bowing out. On one string, we do the same thing with a reduced angle. For the change into the down bow, I use a minimum of lateral wrist motions to avoid any jerkiness on smooth connections, and don't deviate from the right bow angle at all. I let the arm drop before the change so that the wrist is flat as the bow change occurs. Don't abandon control over your bow grip during bow changes at the frog. Stay in gear, so to speak, even when you diminish the bow pressure to 0. In the first three sections of chapter B, every note is initiated by a movement of the arm. We shall now investigate some wrist motions. At the beginning of today's session, I tried to train the flexibility of the fingers with vertical movements on a stationary bow. At letter A in section 4, I combine the finger motions with lateral movements of the wrist. That seems indispensable to me when we look for a precision in short sounds that cannot be controlled from the shoulder. Examples might be taken from the scherzo of the second Brahms sonata. Or the last movement of the Haydn concerto in C major. While we shall often combine these wrist motions with those of the arm in actual playing, let us see here how far wrist snaps alone can take us. The arm is poised at the pianissimo level, fingers and wrist bite into the string on each note. When several of these notes go in the same direction, the visual effect is one of a barbed wire. At letter B, we deal with a second unavoidable use of the wrist in rapid string changes back and forth. Here the arm remains in a steady double stop position, while the wrist undulates evenly. In legato bowings, we must watch this evenness, particularly just before bow changes. The classic example is the first movement of the second Brahms sonata. An example for detached notes of this kind is the first of the Piatti caprices. Finally, most string players use a liberal wrist movement when they perform the so-called sautiller stroke. I find the confusion with foreign language terminology of various short bow strokes to be so widespread that I prefer to call this stroke the launch bowing, because an elliptic wrist motion launches a small rubbing stroke into the air. It is at this time that I would like to reassert the usefulness of the third finger. Almost no one presses with the little finger in this stroke. On the other hand, the exclusive use of the first and second finger makes the bow dangle and does not seem to control all speeds as well as when the third finger also feels the stick. The so-called spiccato bowing that I prefer to call the thrown bow involves two elements, the drawing of the bow and the biting into the string from above. When there is not enough of the first, the stroke sounds choked. Not enough bite makes it sound lame. The two elements are practiced alternately in section 5, the lateral arm movement getting gradually longer until it is continuous at letter C. The attack from above is learned via an increasing number of ricochet notes. Each group of these notes will use only one arm impulse, the tight bow grip changing to a loose one immediately following the bow's impact. And so on. Section D leads thrown bows seamlessly into launch strokes and back, so that bounced bow strokes are available to us at all speeds. Let us avoid the embarrassing situation of having to say that we would prefer a different tempo for a movement or a passage, but can't make the bow jump at that speed. The transition is effected by remembering the characteristics of each stroke. We lift the arm for the slower strokes thrown onto the string, the bow balanced in the hand with the help of the little finger. And we lower the arm toward the faster strokes launched from the string, abandoning the use of the little finger. The fear of sounding unfree leads sometimes to a neglect of the practice of spun sounds. I deplore that very much. I have spoken a lot about bell sounds, but it seems to be a great pity not also to be able to spin even sounds across the length of the bow on the right occasions, instead of simply changing the bow whenever it is used up, like a singer running out of breath. One should practice holding a note for 10, 12, 16 seconds, simply because some passages sound much more eloquent without extraneous bow changes. Mechanically, we need the kind of support from the thumb and the upper arm that the singer derives from the diaphragm and the abdominal muscles. If the intensity imparted to the string never exceeds this latent reserve strength, we shall not choke the sound. With that in mind, please work patiently on section 6. The seventh and last section of chapter B deals with continuous arm motions with intermittent accents. Not only do a good portato and a brilliant flying and hard staccato enrich our musical palette very nicely, they also involve the basic skill of being relaxed in one part of the bow arm while another one is active. Real bow control only begins with this differentiation within the right arm mechanism, when we get beyond the point where the arm is all firm or all limp. I shall discuss this later in detail when we talk about scale bowings. Common to everything that has been said today about the bow, and without which word and picture will remain ineffective, is something that might be called the elegance of concept. With this, I don't mean to refer to Rococo prettiness, but rather to a readiness to come to grips directly with what the music tells us, to use means that are apt for an aesthetic purpose, to shun that which proves to be unsuited or clumsy, what our better instincts tell us to avoid, but what we let sneak in by the back door of inertia. It takes relentless care to have the bow convey truly what we mean to say. But our reward is a wonderful feeling of being able to speak with 1,000 tongues.